Week 1 in the NFL is over. And as fantasy managers, how much fear do we have? What players should we be fearful about? And how about in our own lives? How do we handle fear? And how do we live worry-free? It's next. This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast, where we unpack fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson with Trip Smith, and we are your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while we all play fantasy football with purpose. As we provide fantasy advice, we won't always be right, as we will indicate today, but we hope will be convincing. We are coming to you live at 2:45 Eastern on this Tuesday afternoon. We are in the Unpacking It Ministry studio in Charlotte, North Carolina. Glad to be here. Aaron is here, our producer. We'll say hello to Trip in just a moment. Thanks to everybody watching live right now, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can leave your comments anywhere you're listening. We'll try to take a look at those, answer some questions throughout the show. We always appreciate your feedback and support. And those of you that are loyal podcast listeners, we appreciate you. And when you rate, review, that's a big help as well. Fantasy Football Fellowship is up and running on our website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. The weekly breakouts. Week 2 releases today at 5 Eastern. If you are not already registered, make sure you do so. You can get a free membership on fantasyfootballfellowship.com, and hopefully you'll read the content, explore the content, and then discuss it with your league, the other members of your league. So check that out, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Also, be sure to check out the Unpacking It podcast. Today, I talked all about the need to be patient. And so I talked about a number of NFL teams and those fan bases that need to be patient. That message also resonates today for us as fantasy managers. We've got to be patient. It was only week 1. We'll get into that a little bit more today, but our breakout topic here on the show is all about fear, because after week 1, there's a little bit of fear that starts to creep in about some of our players on our rosters that had a tough week. And so we will get into that in just a moment. We'll also do What's Boiling Bryce. We'll talk Waiver Wire. We have got a ton to get to, bandwagon riding as well. We're going to have some fun. But first, we begin with some shenanigans. And let's say hello to Trip. Trip, how you doing, man? Week 1 in the books.
I'm doing great. You know, I love fantasy football so much that it's important for me to remind myself that, hey, there's real NFL football that comes before and is above and better than the fantasy game that I'm playing. And so I try not to look at my fantasy scores until at least those 1:00 games are over. And I had a great time watching football this weekend, Thursday night, Friday night, watched a little JV on Saturday, and then back to the good stuff on Sunday and Monday, man. So yeah, it's a good reminder that there's real football when my fantasy teams struggled.
So I had 3 TVs, and one of them was the quad box with Sunday Ticket. The middle was Scott Hansen in the red zone. And then over on the right, I thought that it was real football, but turns out it was not real football. It was the Panthers game. So that was over on the right side. Man. That was over on the right side. I'm not sure what that was. I don't know if anyone let the Panthers know that this was actually the regular season. The season had begun.
Speaking of JV, man.
And it was unfortunate. But we're not going to go there yet. We're not going to go there yet. The initial reaction, some of the shenanigans from the weekend, my 2 big takeaways. One, I was impressed with a number of the rookies, but the rookies that we thought were going to be great, the Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison, we thought those guys maybe right away. I wasn't necessarily in on them, but in general, kind of the fantasy community, those 2 didn't. So what do we say about that? But then Xavier Worthy, he got things going in a huge way Thursday night with the Chiefs. So the rookies were interesting. And then the veteran running backs. It was wild in the offseason how all the veteran running backs left to go to a new team. Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, you go down the list, and guess what? All of them played well. And those guys I just mentioned were the top running backs in week 1. And throw in even Alexander Madison. You know, those guys, all across the board. Austin Eckler had a decent game. So all the veteran running backs. So those are my 2 big takeaways. What about for you?
Yeah, it's been a trend in the NFL. You don't pay your running backs, right? You pay your QBs, your wide receivers. Ask the Cincinnati Bengals how they feel about that today, man. I mean, Joe Mixon looked so good, and it pays to have one of those bell cows, one of those studs. It's worth getting one of those guys, and they matter in fantasy too, much to my chagrin. I feel like I remember over the last few years, every week one for the last 2 or 3 seasons, having this funny feeling of like, this is not what fantasy football normally looks like. And so I went back and checked it out. And it is true that since we've seen more and more this trend of your starting offense playing less and less in the preseason, this week one always is rough. And so I think there was only one quarterback that threw for over 300 yards this weekend. Only 3 that threw for over 250 yards. And the craziest stat I heard was that in week one last year and the year before, something like 60 to 62 touchdowns were thrown, passing touchdowns across the league. And it was in the low 30s this weekend.
Wow.
So just to say, if you're worried about your quarterback, if you're worried about one of your stud receivers, pump the brakes just a little bit, calm down just a little bit, okay? Because those guys are going to be all right, I think.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And we have to remind ourselves every year because it is the case. Offenses take a while to get going. And I think the way that it plays out too is that we saw a lot of big plays.
Right.
Big, long touchdowns. The Rashid Shaheeds had the big games. And so it's like, whoa, the Alec Pierce with the Colts. It's like, these 60, 70-yard catches. Even Alan Lazard last night with the Jets. That isn't necessarily going to happen week in, week out.
Right.
And so what will ultimately happen in, week 4 and beyond, the rhythm. Quarterbacks get into a rhythm. They move the ball around. And guess what position was totally forgotten about, except for Isaiah Likely? The tight end position.
Tight end.
No right. Tight ends did well. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, Sam Laporta, nothing. Kelsey, nothing. I mean, you go down the list, and that isn't the position that maybe gets off to the hot start, which I guess in some ways was surprising to me. But it doesn't mean that now all of a sudden teams aren't going to use the tight end. No way. They'll get it going. And so it was cute. The boomer bust wide receivers had their day to shine. Those guys are not usually my guys. I try to stay away from those guys, but it cost me in week 1, but that's okay.
Right.
Because I want the guys that are consistent and steady all season long. So that's who we're going to count on. The one other kind of shenanigan from the weekend, the biggest shenanigan, last night, I get home from a walk, lovely walk with my wife and daughters. CMC's out. He's not even playing in the Niners game last night. I mean, out of the blue. Now, thankfully, I love CMC, former Panther, met him. He's a great guy. I root for him. But I wasn't into him this year in fantasy. I went the Bijan Robinson route, which we'll talk more about. But CMC is out. And then Jordan Mason comes in, and it's like they didn't even need CMC. And that's remarkable at this point for the Niners to continue running back after running back after running back. Of course, they love CMC. But Jordan Mason, that was impressive to me. So he's one of the hot guys on waiver wire. That's funny to say, but he's one of the guys we're going after on the waiver wire this year. Thankfully, I do have him on a bench. I didn't play him last night. I didn't need to, thankfully. But that was a surprise. Any other kind of big shenanigans from the weekend, and then we'll jump into our breakout.
I don't think so, man. You hit all of them. Yeah, I mean, I got thoughts on CMC and Jordan Mason, but we'll get to those later. So fun weekend, though. Hey, remember, football is fun. It's fun to watch football, and I had a great time, even though my teams were struggling a little bit.
That's all right. That's part of the process. Two other things I'll mention. So I'm ripping on the Panthers. How about the former Panther quarterbacks having big days? Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield. Are you kidding me? And then also I mentioned Rashid Shaheed having a big day. Well, that meant Chris Olave did not have a big day. That's got to swap. And then how about in Detroit? Jamison Williams has a monster game. Amon-Ra St. Brown, nowhere to be found. You got to think that flips moving forward as well. So that was some more shenanigans for us today. The big lineup decision that I made this week that ended up working for me, I started Jordan Love over Joe Burrow because I didn't like the weirdness with the Bengals going into week 1. That was a good gut feeling. However, at church on Sunday, as I'm leaving, a guy goes, "Hey man, don't forget, I can't even say his name. Andre Iosivas? Iosivas. Yeah. Thank you. That's pretty good. You got it. Iosivas. He goes, "Hey man, he's playing today. T. Higgins is out." And I go, "Oh, okay, I better go pick him up." And then I put him in my lineup, and I went against my gut feeling on that. And so that was a miss. So he didn't do much for me. But anyway, those are my lineup decisions. We will get to our accountability and confession in just a little bit. We try to hold ourselves accountable here on this show when we miss. So we will do that in a little bit. But right now, we've got to get to this week's Breakout, and we are talking fear. We take fantasy concepts, relate them to the Bible, relate them to life, and we will start on the fantasy side. So some of the players that did not do well for you in week 1, are you panicking? Are you worried? And do you have fear that that guy is not going to live up to the hype? And then as we pull out too, just this concept of fear and fantasy, I think it infiltrates so many elements of the life of a fantasy manager. We fear every time we make a lineup change. We fear, oh no, if I put this guy in, is this other guy on my bench going to do better than him? And oh no, what if I miss on that? And we fear the potential outcomes, and we worry about what might happen. And so this consumes us, and in some ways it paralyzes us as fantasy managers, because sometimes we'll be too fearful to pull off a trade. We take too much fear into the waiver wire, and we're worried like, oh no, if I drop this guy off my team and then he goes off and somebody else picks him up, then what am I going to do? And then we keep a guy longer than we should. And so all of that factors in. But we'll start with the fear of some of these players that maybe had an off week. So Trip, we think about a few of the teams that really got off to a bad start. The Falcons, the Bengals, the Browns, the Panthers, the Giants. Any players from those teams that you are fearful about, and any players that you go, nah, I'm okay, I'm good. I'm going to be patient.
I'll name a couple, and they're both receivers. I mean, I'm afraid for Drake London. Kirk Cousins just didn't look healthy. And granted, TJ Watt is an absolute freak. And so he's going to haunt Kirk Cousins' nightmares for the rest of this week and maybe weeks to come. You don't want to be coming back from your first game with a torn Achilles to face TJ Watt. That guy is so good. But there were just plays where he just looked like he didn't have the kind of umph behind the ball that he usually has. And it seems like the guy who was most affected by that was Drake London. So I'm a little bit worried for him if Cousins continues to get off to a slow start, let's say. The guy that I have on almost every team that I drafted this year that I am just 5-alarm fire, abandon ship as quickly as possible is Deontay Johnson. We talked about this so much in the preseason. Things can't be worse for the Panthers than they were last year. And so even if they're just bad, he's the better Adam Thielen, and he's going to get so many receptions. The one possibility that I did not entertain is that the Panthers are worse this year than they were last year. They looked terrible. Bruce Young, I know we don't want to call him Bryce anymore. Bruce Young looked terrible, okay? And the Panthers, as someone who is an aspiring Panthers fan, I want to cheer for the Panthers. I want to be optimistic for the Panthers. They look so bad, and I'm just worried that Deontay, even though I think he's the best receiver on that team by a wide margin and one of the better receivers in the NFL, I think a solid tier 2 receiver in the NFL, I don't think that things are going to get better for him this season.
So I would definitely fear having any Panthers players on your roster. Player. Now, my fear is that the Panthers wait too long to put Andy Dalton in. And so that's my fear.
What is too long? I mean, beyond week 2? Like what?
One more week, and I don't think it's going to be pretty against the Chargers. So Andy Dalton, week 3, then get excited for Deontay Johnson.
Salvage some of those skill players.
It'll be nice.
Yeah.
Let's not forget, Andy Dalton last year when he came in against Detroit, played very well, and the offense was humming. So, and that was last year's offense. This, I think, with Dave Canales, with Andy Dalton out there, don't give up. So don't drop Deontay Johnson.
Oh, I'm not going to drop him.
Just
you're
keep
saying
him
he's going to have the Flacco effect, is what you're saying.
That's
he's going to come in, old guy who we have forgotten about, who is still a serviceable QB.
Andy Dalton, that gives me a little hope. He's going to save the day. He's going to save the day.
That makes me so sad for Bryce Young, man. But yeah, I think you're right.
All right. So the other where I would be fearful too, the Giants are bad. The Giants are legitimately bad because the false hope that the Vikings felt on Sunday points to how bad the Giants are. And the false hope that the Saints have points to how bad the Panthers are when Bruce Young is out there. And so to me, the team that I'm not fearful about, the Atlanta Falcons. This was Kirk Cousins' first game. He's coming back from an Achilles. I think he's going to be fine. So I'm not worried about any of those guys. I went all in on them with Bijan. I think Kyle Pitts will be good. He showed some glimpses. And even your boy Drake London, I'm okay. I think they're going to be fine.
Okay. Thanks for talking me off that ledge. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I would say I was not in on the Cardinals. I think having a little bit of fear about the Cardinals and Marvin Harrison, I think is fair. I think the fear for Derrick Henry, no fear. You'll be fine. The Ravens are going to be good. I know Lamar ran all over the field on Thursday night against the Chiefs. And so they didn't lean on Derrick Henry as much. He still got into the end zone. That's not going to happen every week. They can't have Lamar running as much as he did on Thursday night. There's no way. That's not sustainable. And then one other player, are you fearful or not? James Cook and the Bills. I've got James Cook on a team. There's a little bit of fear because Josh Allen is just that good, and he's just going to continue to run. And I wish that he didn't. I wish that he would pass the ball around. I wish don't get me wrong. Some receivers stepped up, but even in some of those moments where just don't run every time, dump it off to James Cook. I would like to see more of that, but James Cook averaged only 3.7 per carry, a little bit concerning there. So here's the deal. We've got fear in fantasy football. It creeps in. There is worry. There's reasons to worry, right? And so we have to evaluate all of these, players that are performing poorly. And then we always fear injuries, especially to our top players. And then we fear the delay that some of these players, it's going to take them 4 or 5 weeks. And, oh no, am I going to be able to survive with my fantasy team that long? And so ultimately though, my encouragement to us, even as fantasy managers, is we don't want to play scared. We don't want to let worry deter us from making wise decisions and remaining calm and having peace. And so we don't want to make drastic decisions, especially after week 1. I did the Unpacking the podcast this morning all about patience. We have to be patient. And so we can't let fear drive us to then make impatient decisions. So we have to be careful of that. And so as we parallel this to our own lives, the reality is fear and worry and anxious thoughts threaten us all the time. We sense that they creep in to all different areas of our life, different situations. And the challenge for us is to battle against it. And so for some of us, fear is paralyzing. It's preventing us from fully living. And it's holding us back in so many different ways. And it's impacting, jobs or relationships or school or other situations. And so maybe, today in different ways or for different reasons, we're feeling, afraid or worried and concerned about what might happen in the future or decisions that are weighing on us. And we're fearful for potential outcomes and maybe it's an adverse outcome and, oh no, what would happen? What would we do? And so then we're, just like in fantasy, sometimes we're fearful that, oh no, I'm going to make the wrong decision. And, oh no, if I put this guy in the starting lineup, I'm going to, and we think about that too. It's like, oh no, if I take this job, then what happens? Or what if I move over here? And we allow this to sort of take over and dominate our thoughts. And we're driven by fear. And so my encouragement and our hope today is that as followers of Jesus, when we surrender our lives to Jesus, he doesn't want us to fear and worry and be bogged down by that. He wants to be with us and battle with us and help us through the fear so that we don't have to worry, that we don't have to live a worried life, that we can actually live a worry-free life. It is possible. And so I'm going to have Tripp jump in here. But this is what the Apostle Paul writes in Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. It's powerful. Do we believe it? And are we finding our peace in Jesus? Go ahead, Tripp.
I mean, for me, the first important thing to remember on this subject is that in the world that we live in, and the way that I've come to think of this is the algorithm, the capital A algorithm, those systems in the world that we live in that decide what content comes before our eyes, what news stories catch our attention, what are the things that we talk about the most. It lends itself so much to fear. Fear is, in some ways, it's an attractive emotion. We spiral down into it. And when we set our eyes on the things that cause fear in our hearts, sort of paradoxically, we spiral further and further into sin. And so just to remember how many times in the Gospels, Jesus greets his followers, he greets his disciples, he greets his friends by saying, don't be afraid. Fear not. It's me. I'm here. His desire for us is that he would interrupt that fear spiral that the world wants us to fall into by saying, don't be afraid. Remember who I am. Remember that I'm with you. And I absolutely love that Philippians verse that you just read, because for me, the operative phrase is the peace of God, which exceeds what we can understand, the peace of God, which surpasses understanding. What Jesus isn't sort of a therapist that we set a few appointments with and say, here are the things that I'm afraid of. Can you give me some tactics to cope with them? Jesus says, I'm with you. I go with you. I am present with you. And that can give you a peace that surpasses even what you can understand and articulate. And so when I feel myself spiraling into fear, I want to pray, Jesus, show up, be with me. Say, fear not to my heart, Jesus. Remind me that you're here, you're present, you care for me.
Amen. Amen. From a fantasy perspective, I want us to be fantasy managers that play with confidence, that have peace, that make decisions. And hey, I'm not worried about the outcomes. I'm not worried if my starting running back gets injured. I'll find somebody on the waivers. And to me, that type of mentality is maybe hard in fantasy, but it's possible in life. As followers of Jesus, that mentality to say, I don't have to fear. I don't have to worry. The God of the universe loves me, has saved me, and is with me. So what do I have to fear? What do I have to worry? No matter what the outcome even ends up being, even if it is a bad outcome, not the outcome that I wanted, I can trust that he's still good. I can trust that he's still with me. And so again, to this verse, the peace that surpasses understanding. It's like, well, how could you be okay in that situation? Well, God is with me. So what do you mean? And so do we really believe that? And are we living that out? And it's hard. And for me, the battle that I face regularly is, am I going to fear that our ministry, which is run based on donor support, that we're going to run out of money, that we're not going to have enough money at the end of the month to get through the month? It's a fear that creeps in. But when I keep my eyes fixed on Jesus and fully surrendered and fully trust to say, God's got this. God has been faithful. God will be faithful. I can trust him. And so I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to let the worry and the fear, because oftentimes midway through the month, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, what's going to happen? What if this happens? Oh no. And now I'm playing all the what if games and I get distracted. And then it kind of, I get paralyzed in some ways. And Jesus is saying, don't worry. Don't worry about anything. Pray about everything. Trust God. And so that's the encouragement for us today. And we'll even look to the Old Testament with David and multiple Psalms that we can look to. And so Psalm 34:4, David says, I prayed to the Lord and he answered me. He freed me from all my fears. And then Psalm 56:3-4, when I am afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. And so instead of worrying about, what might happen or fearing potential adverse outcomes, as followers of Jesus, let's trust him. Let's be at peace no matter what. Let's know that God is with us. And then let's confidently tell others the reason for our hope, the reason for our peace. That man, yeah, I can operate in confidence. Because people can ask me, Bryce, how do you, aren't you fearful? Like, what if you run out of money at the end of the month? Well, I just want to trust God. I want to be hopeful that he's going to provide like he has for the last 10 plus years. So that's where my hope is. And even if, and here's the deal too. And even if we do run out of money, I trust that then God will open up a new door for me. And so that's what I have to go and rely on him. But that mentality. And so are we battling against fear, or are we just accepting and embracing it? And to Tripp's point, we live in this world of fear where it's kind of okay. Everybody's worried. Everybody's fearful. And we just sort of accept it and embrace it. No, let's battle against it. And let's fill our minds with truth and God's word and continue to rely on him. Tripp, I'll preach on this all day, but any final words?
Dude, I feel like you're preaching straight to my heart, man. I love what you're saying. I mean, I'm thankful that you included so many Psalms here, because what does David do in the Psalms? He takes his fears and he turns them into prayers, and it's something that it's almost a cliche in children's movies that we've heard so much at this point. Like, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's when you're afraid and you choose to move forward anyway. That's true for us even more as followers of Jesus, as people who trust in God. It's we will have fears, but do you spiral down into them and sort of self-focused kind of navel gazing, or do you hand your fears over to the Lord through prayer? That's what that Philippians verse and those Psalms have in common. You can turn your fears into prayers, and God really will meet you there and give you courage to move forward.
I lost you at navel gazing.
I said, have you heard? First I said nasal gazing, which would be even harder. Navel gazing. Hey, go look it up. We don't have time to talk about it. It's a real phrase. I didn't just make it up. All right. Occasionally I'll make up fake phrases here, but that's a real one. So
we don't want the navel gazing.
Don't want the navel gazing. Not looking down.
There you
You're
go.
looking up.
There you go.
Presenting your fears to the Lord in prayer.
I like it. I like it. No, it's good. No, I don't want to take away from the truth of what you're saying. It's strong. So let's move forward as fantasy managers. Let's not play scared. And as followers of Jesus, let's not live scared. Let's pray, and with thanksgiving and peace, continue to keep our eyes on Jesus. So I hope that's encouraging. I know it's a great reminder to me, because it's so easy to find reasons to worry. But it's a battle. Every day is a battle. So let's keep fighting in the right way. And lastly, as a reminder too, when we've been saved by Jesus, like our eternity is taken care of. So if we don't have to fear death anymore, then really, why are we worried about anything else? I mean, we have to kind of go back to that. Like that's the hope that we have too. So I want to remind us of that as well. So we'd love to know kind of the players that you're most fearful of, and even, what prayer requests do you have today? What are you worried about in your own life that you need, us to come alongside of you as well? So feel free to leave those comments if you want to publicly, but you can, even better than that, send a DM or an email, Bryce@fantasyfootballfellowship.com. We'd love to hear from you and just kind of want to know, all right, what are people fearing right now? What are our listeners fearing? Fantasy wise, but more importantly, life-wise. All right, so we're having some fun here on the show today, and I already let out a little bit of frustration about the Carolina Panthers, but there's another team and a few players that we hyped up in the offseason that week one let us down, and so I've got to get this off my chest. Here we go. All right, Jacksonville Jaguars, there you were. You're beating the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins with all these incredible weapons, and you've got the lead going into halftime. You're loving life. Trevor Lawrence throws a touchdown to, the rookie, and we're all excited about Brian Thomas Jr., and, oh, man, looking good. Well, then the second half comes, and who lets us down at the end of the game? None other than Travis Etienne.
No.
I had to take his jersey down off the wall today. I replaced him with George Pickens, who had a nice day. So Travis Etienne fumbles the ball, lets us down there, and then Jacksonville totally allows the Dolphins back in the game. And then at the end of it, how does Evan Ingram do? Nothing fantasy-wise. Christian Kirk, nothing fantasy-wise. Trevor Lawrence last year was a disappointment. But you know what? I said, I'm going to give him another shot. He's a former number one pick. We remember 2 years ago what he did when Doug Peterson finally took over after the disaster of Urban Meyer. And, man, they went to the playoffs and got a playoff win. It's like, all right, I'm going to go back to Trevor Lawrence. And then week one, total letdown. Where was Evan Ingram? Where was Christian Kirk? Gabe Davis a little bit. And now all of a sudden we've got the Tank Bigsby getting involved and confusing me and fantasy managers. All right, what does that mean for Travis Etienne? What does that mean for the rest of this offense? What do we do with the Jaguars? You got me boiling today. I'm fed up and fired up after 1 week. So, Trip, am I out of line here? Do I need to be patient? How do we feel about the Jaguars after their kind of meltdown against the Dolphins?
You are not out of line to be boiled up, to be stirred up and angry about this. And imagine being a Jaguars fan. I mean, you had that game well in hand. And what happened is Etienne, about 2 yards away from the goal line on a long run, a Dolphins player, to be fair, makes this great punch tackle and knocks the ball out, fumble, Dolphins recover. And then the very next play was the 80-yard touchdown pass to Tyreek Hill. And it was just like you could feel the Jaguars deflating in that moment. I mean, I think Trevor Lawrence had 160-something passing yards on the day, and about 125 of those were in the first half. So something weird happened with the game plan and with just sort of the demoralization of the team in the second half that makes me less concerned as a fantasy owner of these different players moving forward. I think this was a little bit of a just preseason or beginning of the season, so kind of things just being clunky. And there was just a two-play turn of events that seemed to demoralize them so much. So I'm not worried yet about Trevor Lawrence. I might actually be going out and trying to trade for Travis Etienne, especially if somebody is nervous about the Tank Bigsby effect. A little more nervous for Ingram and Kirk just because I think that passing volume is going to be distributed between Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. as well. So maybe some of those pass catchers I'm a little more nervous about, but I'm not ready to sort of throw in the towel on the season for these Jaguars guys yet. But man, what a way to lose a game. You were up 17-7 at the end of the half. And then, I mean, they didn't score in the second half. So brutal.
Pathetic. Not good. And guess what I did? We're going to do accountability and confession in just one moment. I benched Jaden Daniels and started Trevor Lawrence over him. Mm-hmm. I mean, how silly.
I did the same thing with Anthony Richardson.
Did you?
Put him on my bench for Trevor. Yeah.
Oh.
Said this is going to be a high-scoring game.
Yes.
And
which makes sense. And it should have been. I mean, and even Miami wasn't great. I mean, Devon Achane had a nice day, and Tyreek did too, but not the Dolphins that we're used to. And they're another team. Give them a week or two. They'll be rocking and rolling in all regards. But I picked up Jonnu Smith in a couple leagues, and he was not a non-factor for the Dolphins. But anyway, it was it was disappointing to watch. I was happy for Jaden Daniels. He had a great game, but he was on my bench. So that was.
Did he have a great game?
Well, fantasy-wise,
he had a great fantasy
fantasy-wise, but yeah, he's got a ways to go.
We'll talk about the Commanders in a minute.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So anyway, there you go. There's the Jags. But no, I don't like having two receiving threats on the same team. That's like a core principle of mine. But the way that my draft went in a certain league, I have Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, and I started both of them, and I will not do that again. So I'll have to pick Ingram. So Kirk's going to the bench until he shows me what he's got.
I think that's the right decision.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. So we've got more to hold ourselves accountable to and confess to you as our listeners. And I asked a few friends to help us out. All right, so there you go. So we're going to talk about the players that we missed on, but then also some of the players that we got right, and we're feeling encouraged about following week one. And so I will start with some confession, and it was wild. In week one, almost every player that I was out on this offseason had a monster first game. And so I'll admit, hey, these guys were great week one, but I'm not changing my overall opinions and thoughts on an overall season. Hey, good for Joe Mixon. He had a great week one, and he fit right in with Houston. Stephon Diggs, wow. Couple touchdowns. Did he have two touchdowns? Two touchdowns? Gosh, that's unbelievable. I can't wait for Nico Collins, my guy, to get into the end zone, but he had a nice day anyway. But Nico and Joe Mixon, two guys I'm out on. I'm okay with that, but they had a great week one. But here's the deal. Is Joe Mixon really going to have 30 carries every week? Come on, at this age, he's not going to do that. I don't buy that. And eventually Tank Dell's going to get more involved. Nico's going to get involved, but they wanted to get Diggs in on the action. Week one, good for them. So that's fine. So I was wrong for one game. And then also I was totally out, and I continue to be totally out on the Vikings and the Saints. Good for the Saints. They beat up on the Panthers. Good for the Vikings, the hapless Giants. Let's see both of those teams do it again. All right. Before we jump to any crazy conclusions about the players on those teams, especially Sam Darnold. They'll go run into the waiver wire on Sam Darnold. Let's wait and see. So, but anyway, I ripped on both those teams, Vikings and Saints. And so I was wrong after 1 week. So I will confess that. I apologize. But we'll see from there. All right, Tripp, what do you need to confess today?
I mean, I already talked about Deontay Johnson, but I think there's just that group of middle tier receivers that I was really optimistic about. DJ Moore, DK Metcalf. I'm worried that the Seahawks passing attack is going to, no offense, Aaron, I'm worried that it's going to be more unimpressive than I was hoping for.
Oh,
and
come
so
on.
I'm sorry, man. I'm
Come
sorry, but
on.
it just didn't look inspiring, let's say. I mean, I think DK is going to be okay, but I just don't know if Geno can sustain DK, Lockett, and JSN.
Well, Lockett did more than we thought.
Lockett looked like the best receiver on the team when he's 45 years old or something like that. You know, he's older than me, and he looked
him and
like
Mike Evans.
Yeah, ageless wonders, I guess. How are you feeling about your boy Kamani Vidal?
You had to bring that up.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I was with you on it, so I want to know how you're feeling.
All right. I think I was pretty clear, Kamani Vidal, or even in the offseason, we have to give him time. Like, but here's where I was wrong. I never thought J.K. Dobbins would come out and do what he did in week 1. That was remarkable. That was a monster game for Dobbins. And just as a fan of football and fan of people, good for him. The guy's battled injuries. You know, he came out of Ohio State, a talented player, has shown glimpses over the years. Maybe the Chargers, got a steal there. But here's the deal too. He's got injury issues. So can J.K. Dobbins keep that up for a full season? I would say it's unlikely based on the track record. And so that's why I want Kamani Vidal stashed on my bench, because we know the Chargers are going to run, and they're going to run well. Jim Harbaugh has come in week 1, put his stamp on this team, and it already feels better. They get, that was a decently tight game with the Raiders. I was following that game a little bit in the 4:00 hour. I started grilling in the backyard. Beautiful day here in Charlotte. Beautiful. On Sunday. But anyway, I'm still in on Vidal. He was just inactive, so it's not like he's out there playing bad.
Yeah.
I'm just saying once he gets out there, he's going to be a threat. How about that? But Gus Edwards didn't do much.
Right. And eventually either Dobbins or Edwards will get hurt, and then Vidal will be active. And then I think that they will realize that he's the best running back on their team. I mean, I don't know. J.K. Dobbins broke away for 2 long runs. And at the end of both of them, he looked like he was running on one leg. I mean, I love that the guy has made a comeback and he performed well. He just isn't spry the way that he used to be. And I think it's only a matter of time. So I'm not out on Vidal, but if you got a short bench, I think that's the kind of guy that you might have to cut and come back around to.
Well, that's a good point, because yes, early in the season, you need guys that are active and playing and can contribute to your team. There's no doubt about it. A couple other guys I whiffed on week 1. I mean, Dalton Kincaid, but like I said earlier, all the tight ends. So I'm not going to draw any major conclusions if the whole position had a down week. It just, I don't know. It's just a weird week in that regard. Yeah. But with Kincaid, I had hoped and still hope that he will be the number 1 threat in that offense from a passing attack. I think that's still an option, but Keon Coleman looked pretty good as a rookie. Shakir was involved. I think they even had a 3rd wide receiver that got involved. So they were Mac Hollins. Is that he was on the Bills? Yeah. He scored a touchdown. So it's like Mac Hollins. What? I was going to bring him up later, but yeah. So they've got multiple weapons, but I think it'll be different every week. But I'm trusting that Kincaid will still be the consistent week in, week out guy once he gets rolling. So we'll be patient on that. And then I've also got to confess, Jared Goff started him in a league or 2, and that was unfortunate. But that was they got the win. It was kind of a weird offensive game.
Yeah, I'm not worried about him.
For them. And, even wondering about, like, Gibbs was out there for a while, then Montgomery, and they went back and forth. But ultimately, this is going to be a good offense. Jameson Williams, if he even does a little bit of that every week, and then you get Amon-Ra St. Brown, you get Laporta going, Goff will be fine. But week 1 was a little rough. All right, so there you go. There's some confessing. Oh, one thing that we'll monitor throughout the year. I don't like the Arizona Cardinals. And I don't like that everybody was hyping up Kyler Murray. And so I feel a little vindication, but it's just week 1. But do you have to confess about Kyler? Do you have him in your lineups?
I think that the Buffalo Bills are a good team. And I mean, the Cardinals looked like the better team for half of that game, So I'm actually more optimistic about the Cardinals. To be clear, I never thought that the Cardinals as a team were making the playoffs or going to the Super Bowl or anything. I just think that Kyler can sustain himself and a few other relevant fantasy guys. Now, I'll be honest, I am a little bit worried about Marvin Harrison Jr. Because the whole offense seemed to be sort of the center of the field, short passes to Greg Dortch. Trey McBride caught a few of them. I think Michael Wilson caught one down the middle.
Touchdown.
Harrison is that guy who operates on the outside, and that doesn't seem to be the way that their offense functions or the place that Kyler looks when he's scrambling. And so I'm a little bit worried about him, at least for this season. I think he's going to be a great receiver in the NFL, but I had him on a few teams, and I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah, the rookies were interesting.
Yeah.
It was because Brian Thomas Jr. did well. Roma Dunze got injured. So it was a little bit of all over the place in that regard with the rookies. Yeah. All right, let's get to our next segment, and let's talk about some of these guys that either had really great performances or maybe a weak performance. And we've got to ask ourselves, are we going to jump on the bandwagon? All right, we got to start with one of the fantasy darlings of week one, Isaiah Likely. Happened back Thursday night, so we can't forget about him heading into the waiver wire. And, he was unbelievable. He had 9 catches, 12 targets, 111 yards, a touchdown, maybe a touchdown at the end if we didn't have such good technology. So incredible night for him. So the question is, are we jumping on his bandwagon, and or what does that mean for Mark Andrews? And are we jumping off of his bandwagon? Trip, I will let you go first.
I'm all in on the Isaiah Likely bandwagon. If I didn't have one of those top 6 tight ends, if I'm sitting there with like Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Pat Freiermuth, one of these guys, I'm going out and trying to get Isaiah Likely if he is on waivers. Reason being that I think that he is clearly one of the top 3 passing options on the Ravens offense. I'm not worried for Mark Andrews. I heard somebody talking this weekend that essentially he was double covered. He was bracketed for the entirety of that game. I think that the Chiefs said Mark Andrews is not going to be the guy that beats us, and Isaiah Likely is good enough to be that guy. And so I think I might be trying to go make a trade offer for Mark Andrews, but I would be fine rolling with Isaiah Likely as my starting tight end for the rest of the season. I think he'll be a top 12 tight end at the end of the year.
You know what? We should have seen this coming. This wasn't a shocking thing. This shouldn't have been surprising, and he absolutely should have been a last round pick. And honestly, confession, I just sort of overlooked him because I went early with tight ends this year. Right. I've got Sam Laporta, I've got Evan Ingram, I've got Dalton Kincaid. Those are the guys that I'm rolling with this year. But even then, I should have gotten Likely because he's really good, and he was really good last year. And I totally agree with you. He's the third option. If he's one of the top 3. Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. Those are the guys. It's not Rashad Bateman. Stop waiting. It's not happening. He's not, this is not going to be the year. You can save the clip, but I just don't think he's going to do it. So that means, yes, there's enough opportunity for him. I do believe Henry will get more carries. They'll run the ball more and even Justice Hill got involved a little bit too out of the backfield, but Lamar's not going to run that much, like I said earlier. So yeah, Likely on the bandwagon. And I would remain on the bandwagon for Mark Andrews too. So I'm not jumping off just yet. Now, is Isaiah Likely going to do what he did on Thursday every week? No, he's not repeating that. And he might even have an off game this week. Like it'll be enough to be in the consideration for a weekly start spot for sure. Right. Starting tight end. But yeah, he's not gonna be the number 1 tight end every week. I don't buy that. So I'm not jumping on that bandwagon. So also I want to remind everyone, so on our website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com, Harrison Zuckerberg, he was a part of our show last year. He's still a part of Fantasy Football Fellowship. He's got a weekly blog called Is He Legit, where he talks about players that we could target on the waiver wire, guys that maybe have big performances. So he talked about Isaiah Likely. He gave his take. So check that out on fantasyfootballfellowship.com. All right, with continuing on our bandwagon riding, let me throw a couple quarterbacks out there. Baker Mayfield, 289 yards, 4 touchdowns. And then Derek Carr, 3 touchdowns, 200 yards. Trip, are you jumping on the bandwagon for either of these guys?
Let's do the easy one first. Derek Carr, absolutely not. No, I think that the Saints are one of the 5 worst teams in the NFL. They just happened to play a historically bad team on Sunday. So Derek Carr, I don't think is a guy that I'm trying to get into my starting lineup on a regular basis. Baker Mayfield, I think, is one of these guys that you can sort of spot start, or if you were the Jordan Love owner and you're looking for somebody to fill in for a few weeks, I think I'm okay throwing Baker in there. The real takeaway for me from that game is that the Commanders defense is going to give up a lot of high scoring performances to the skill players and the quarterbacks that play against them. So my bigger takeaway there is pay attention to who is playing the Commanders. And if you can stream a quarterback or pick up a spot start wide receiver in the game against the Washington Commanders, I think you're gonna get some points that way this season.
So I'm a big Derek Carr fan. I interviewed him when he was in college, so I like Derek Carr, but I'm out on the Saints this year, so I'm not jumping on that bandwagon. And then Baker Mayfield, I just can't. I can't believe the Bucs got week 1 win. And if they have another good season, I'm going to be very frustrated because I've thought over the last 3 years, Tom Brady's final season, and then the last year and this year, that they were going to be bad. Like they finally would fall off the cliff, and it just doesn't happen. And same with Mike Evans. It's just remarkable. So I got to give a ton of love to Mike Evans. And then even their new receiver, what's his name? McMillan. He was pretty good. So they've got some weapons. So I think Baker,
Chris Godwin in the slot again.
They've got some guys. Kate Otton's not a bad tight end. So Baker could have some good weeks, but I probably won't rush to go get him on waivers. But so am I jumping on his bandwagon reluctantly? Possibly.
I got one foot on the bandwagon, but I'm ready to jump off at a moment's notice. Yeah.
All right. I got one more guy here, and then we'll wrap up the show with some waiver wire talk. So Tyjae Spears, he only had 8 touches for 32 yards. I'm thrilled with what Tony Pollard did. Had him in a lineup this week. Awesome. I am not jumping off the Tyjae Spears bandwagon. I think Spears will be relevant in this rushing attack. I think both Pollard and Spears will have good weeks. I think it's probably hard to start Spears until we see it. So you got to be patient with it, but I would not drop him. I would hang on to him. Spears has talent, and he worked well with Henry last year as a 1-2 punch. And I think he'll be able to do that with Pollard too. So I'm remaining on the bandwagon. So there you go. All right, let's jump to our last clip, our last segment. We'll do waiver wire, and we'll ask the question, who is that? As we take a look at certain guys that had big performances that maybe we weren't ready for, we weren't familiar with. And again, we're talking waiver wire guys. And so let's see if Mark Wahlberg can help us with this. All right. So there you go. All right. So that's the question we're asking ourselves for all these guys. Let's start with the Rams. So Puka Nacua goes down. DeMarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, both those wide receivers come in. Which of these guys do you want on waivers now that Puka's going to be out for a few weeks?
It's DeMarcus Robinson. And you've got it here in the show notes. He, at the end of the season last year, when Kupp was kind of in and out of games and just wasn't performing at a high level, DeMarcus Robinson had a nice little stretch of games. And I think that he is still a good receiver. Most of all, I think that Sean McVay loves him. And so, he's a guy that I want to start. I also think who is the tight end there? Is it Colby Parkinson?
Is it Cody or Colby? Cody Parkinson?
Cody Parkinson. I think that's a guy who you could spot start at tight end occasionally as well. So, DeMarcus is the guy you want to pick up there.
All right, let's talk about Alec Pierce. Had a big game, and then you've also got this was for Indianapolis. Also, who got into the end zone? Ashton Dulin. How about that? So maybe Aaron can hit the Mark Wahlberg there. So these two guys, Dulin and Pierce, I think they had nice weeks because Pittman was a non-factor, which is a little concerning, but also Josh Downs was injured. So to me, in the scheme of things, in the long run, the guys you want from the Colts have to be Pittman and Downs. But with Anthony Richardson, we're still trying to figure him out. I don't think we know enough of what wide receivers he's going to lean on. And so the jury's still out kind of who we want in the passing game. But as far as Pierce and Dulin go, I'm probably not going to pick them up and expect a lot from them the rest of the way.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Richardson completed 9 passes the entire game and threw for 220-something yards. He missed Adonai Mitchell on 2 long receptions. He overthrew him. And so any one of those guys could catch a long touchdown on any given week if you just want to throw them in there and hope that Dulin, or it probably is going to be Pierce more often than not, catches the long bomb, then by all means, go for it. But I think you're right. It's Pittman and nobody else there for me.
All right, I'm going to run through a bunch of names that actually got into the end zone. How about we talk about tight ends struggling? A couple actually got into the end zone. Foster Moreau, tight end for the Saints, got into the end zone. I would not pick him up in fantasy. How about Chig Okonkwo? And then he's the tight end for the Titans. He's okay. He's fine as a backup, a spot starter every once in a while. He's been around. People know who he is. How about Jalen Naylor with the Minnesota Vikings? Jordan Addison's out. So maybe if you buy into the Sam Darnold narrative that he got better with San Francisco. He learned a lot. He's got the talent. Remember, he was the number 3 overall pick. If you believe that, then you go and get Jalen Naylor. I don't, so I'm not going to do that. But that's the option there. All right, so there you go. There's a bunch of names. And even how about Allen Lazard last night? 2 touchdowns for the Jets. I think we forgot about him.
Aaron Rodgers loves Allen Lazard.
Loves him.
So that is a guy I might actually pick up.
I wouldn't rule out Mike Williams. I wouldn't give up on Mike Williams.
When's he going to be healthy? Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, if he comes back healthy, then I think he'll replace Lazard. But Aaron Rodgers loves Allen Lazard.
Big threat there. All right, any final guys that you want to pick up on waivers this week? Any names we need to be aware of?
No. I think there's more guys that I don't want to pick up than guys that I do. So I'm staying calm, staying patient this week, and keeping an eye out in coming weeks. So
yes, and here's the big encouragement for us. See who other managers drop. Wait to see. So instead of blowing all your fab dollars on whoever's on the waiver wire right now, unless that guy's really good, but it is inevitable. People in your league will drop quality players, rookies that didn't do a lot in week 1. They'll go, forget it. Go get those guys. Right. If you believed in them before week 1 and they didn't get injured, you still got to believe in the talent and what they're capable of. So those are the guys that we got to target, on Thursday when you get a chance to go back to the waivers before the weekend begins. So week 1, man, it was fun. We're just getting going here at Fantasy Football Fellowship. Can't wait to talk about week 2. I got a little giddy thinking it's Dolphins Bills on Thursday night. Yes. Oh, let's go. I can't stand the Amazon games, but man, I'm psyched for Thursday night game. That matchup, I should say. And then the Friday one in Brazil. That was kind of fun. I don't know if I could do it every night or every Friday night.
I enjoyed watching. Did the players think that it was fun?
Oh,
did the teams
no
enjoy
way.
it? I don't think so.
No way.
It was fun to watch.
Those guys are never going back to Brazil. They were not happy with that. That grass, that was tough. You can't. Come on, this is the NFL. You can't put these guys in that kind of position. So throw it. You can sprinkle in a little Friday night game throughout the season.
I'm
okay with that.
Friday night. Yeah,
that was fun. I mean, we got to spend some time with our wives too. So the NFL needs to understand. Hey, we still value marriage here. Come on. So last night I had to cut the Manning cast short. Had to spend some time with Jody last night. So but it was great.
I admire you for that decision.
It was great to see the Manning brothers back. Belichick was awesome. Adam Sandler was hilarious. He was great as a Jets fan. So I did catch up. I watched a little bit this morning as well. But anyway, glad football's back. Glad to be with you. Thanks everybody listening. Thanks to Trip. Thanks to Aaron. Apparently some of our sound clips weren't going out on Facebook today, so we'll try to work on that. I'm not sure what the issue was. Facebook, maybe they're not funny. Maybe they don't want to laugh. But we had some funny clips, so we'll work on that. But anyway, thanks everybody. All the comments, appreciate it. Thanks for all the feedback. Be sure to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com, and we will talk to you next week. I'm Bryce. I'm a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as fantasy managers who follow Jesus together. We have no reason to fear. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.